Hello, I'm Morgan Pehme, Editor-in-Chief of City and State, and this is Last Look. Today we bring you my sit-down interview with Dick Parsons, the former head of both Citigroup and of Time Warner. This interview was recorded at our weekend-long retreat for the incoming members of the New York City Council. We hope you enjoy. Dick, rather than introduce you, I figured that as the former chairman of Citigroup and the former chairman and CEO of Time Warner, that some of our new council members who might have been on the front lines of Occupy Wall Street would only think of you as a captain of industry, and they might be surprised by your background, that you didn't grow up on the Upper East Side with a private jet and only eat off platinumware. And I was hoping that you could kind of talk about where you came from.
Brooklyn. I was just talking to some of our colleagues out here. Yeah, I was born, and by the way, this story is not unique to me. I mean, I know most of the guys who were running and gals who were running the major companies here in New York, and a lot of them have the same stories. A lot of them came through the city university system or the public school system as I did. I was born in Brooklyn. I was born Bed-Stuy, Pacific Street and Bedford Avenue. We moved to Queens, South Jamaica when I was 5 or 6 and went to public schools. So I always used to introduce myself as, PS 45, Intermediate School 142, and John Adams High School, all public schools in New York, and went to college on a basketball scholarship, went to the University of Hawaii, of all places, and ended up coming back to New York to go to law school, and after law school I worked for Nelson Rockefeller, who was then still governor, and that was the beginning of my sort of adult career as a lawyer. And Rockefeller sort of dragged me around to Washington and then back to New York. Afterwards, I went into private practice, and then I had my first business incarnation. About a quarter of a century ago, I was first president and then chairman of a distinguished institution, which you have to know, the Dime Savings Bank, which used to be the Dime Savings Bank of Brooklyn, and became the Dime Savings Bank in New York. And it was my privilege to run the Dime for about half a dozen years. Then to Time Warner. Then I thought to retirement, but it ended up with a brief interregnum as chairman of Citigroup because we had a few problems. And you work closely with Governor and Vice President Rockefeller. Mm-hmm. You were the chair of Rudy Giuliani's transition team when he became mayor, the head of Elliot Spitzer's transition team when he became governor. You worked on Mayor Bloomberg and President Obama's transition teams. And what is it that, what was your kind of driving principles in facilitating a transition? What were you trying to impart to those leaders about having an effective new day in government? Well, I spent the first 6.5 years of my life after law school in public service. First in the state, then down in Washington, and then I spent some time helping out in the city, so I sort of knew all the levels of government. And while I never found my way back in a full-time basis, I appreciate the importance of that branch of our, polity here, of our system of organizing and governing. Although we call ourselves, free markets and democracies and capitalism, I mean, government plays a super important role, more important role than many people in business understood, at least until relatively recently. So trying to get good people, trying to get, having some sense of what it looks like on the inside, what kind of skills you need, what kind of temperament you need, what kind of orientation you need, and bringing people, making sure that people can move, who have those skills, who have that temperament, who have that ability to affect things and yet make things move, come into government with new administrations, was just a way of continuing to participate without actually taking another government job myself. And for the new council members, some of our council members are former members of the state legislature, but for new elected officials, I mean, what do you see as the qualities of leadership that make for an effective elected official? Well, that's not one of them.
I'm going to start with a Rockefeller story. He was my first real mentor, and in a political context, even though none of us are perfect, none of us get through this so-called veil of tears without some missteps. He was my sort of political hero. And it goes back to a time I was a young lawyer, and so I was sitting in the back of the room, was having a cabinet meeting, and they were discussing something or other. I don't even today, because this is almost 40 years ago, I don't remember, was 40 years ago, geez. I don't remember the specific subject, but everyone was giving him, in the cabinet, was giving him their take on how he should resolve this piece of legislation based on what, 1199 would say, as opposed to, it was then called the Business Council of New York. This was before the partnership, or what this one's saying, what that one's saying, all giving them their political view. And he said, whoa, time out. He said, last I looked, I'm the elected politician in the room. I have all you people here for one reason, and that's to tell me what's the right thing to do. I'll figure out the politics, right? And I think that's where leadership should start for people who are in elected office. The orientation ought to be, what's the right thing to do? And then you figure out the politics, not what's the right politics, and then you figure out what to do.
You are a past co-chair of the Partnership for New York City, and you obviously have led two of the most important companies in New York City. What do you see, where with Mayor Bloomberg, he obviously was so plugged into the business community. Rudy Giuliani was not so much. Mayor de Blasio is also starting kind of more from the perspective of Mayor Giuliani. What do you see as the relationship between business and government? What should the council members here be thinking about in terms of how to have an effective and still a relationship with business that addresses all of their policy concerns as well?
I would say sort of three things. I'll put it in three buckets. Number one, as I think about what is the job of city government? Not just the mayor, not just the council, but city government as a whole. And it falls into three buckets. One is, to provide for the public safety and welfare. Two is to create an environment where businesses can thrive and grow. And by business, I don't mean public jobs, I mean private jobs. I'll come back to that in a minute. And then three is to make sure that's sustainable by educating young people, right? So to me, those are the three buckets. And I thought, interestingly, I thought that Giuliani really made his mark in the first of the buckets. Kind of civilized the city, made it a place that people wanted to be again, wanted to come again, and felt more comfortable in, and certainly got the garbage picked up and policing and all that sort of stuff. Bloomberg has had more impact on the second of those, creating a business environment that has helped stimulate jobs and has helped New York attain. New York is the most significant and effective economic or fiscal or commercial entity of any city in the world. I think the GDP of this city alone is north of $650 billion. It's larger than any city in the world because it's created an environment where we are just attracting businesses and holding businesses and allowing businesses to grow. I don't think either. Well, you can't say Chatham House rules. I have to be careful how I say this because things can come out of this room. But we haven't yet effectively attacked the third bucket, which is, how are we going to educate our kids to take their place in the 21st century and lead the city to the next century beyond. So I think in terms of how the council should be thinking about this, they ought to have an agenda as a group in each of those buckets. How are we going to make sure the city functions and the people who live here have a quality of life and opportunity that is equitable, fair, and rich. Two, how are we going to work with the business community to make sure that the city is run in a way that it has an embracive posture towards business creation, business development, business growth, because that's where jobs come from. I mean, you know, there are almost 3.5 million people employed in the city of New York. 85% of those people are employed in the private sector, and many of them employed in very small businesses. You know, businesses of 20 and under probably account for close to 1 million of those. Not quite, but close to 1 million of those, and there are 200,000 of those businesses. So, and that's where the growth comes from. It's like a coffee percolator. It starts at the bottom and then you build from there. And the city needs to have, in my opinion, a partnership with the business community so that formation of jobs and that attractiveness of environment for job placement and creation and growth stays in place. And then we need to really attack the education piece in a way that we just haven't to this point in time.
You know, when Mayor de Blasio talked about a Tale of Two Cities on the campaign trail, it seems that kind of speaks to a mentality sometimes of a us against them, where it's the working class, and that it's really separated from the leaders of business, and that there's a lack of understanding. I mean, I'm sure most of our council members grew up in very modest circumstances like yourself. How is it that, having never been a part of the wealthiest people, the people who drive the agenda of the city, that middle-class people can understand where those people are coming from and find a common ground for the good of the city?
Yeah, I mean, I understand the attractiveness of a we versus them approach, particularly if there's unhappiness abroad in the land. It's always, and one aspires to position of leadership, if you can identify who the enemy is or who the bad people are who visited us upon us. In the short term, it's very helpful. In the long term, it's not helpful at all, in my opinion. It isn't we versus them. You know, we are them and they are we. And we all have to figure out how to work together effectively to bring the whole along. I mean, it's no good villainizing one group that is playing an important or vital role, because if they drop out, then everybody suffers. By the same token, there's no group pointing fingers. It's no good pointing fingers at another group and saying that, you know, we're creating everything and you're just coming along, because without quote working class, or whatever you want to call the majority, who basically just get up and go to work every day, you don't have a business, right? So whenever I was running a business, I would do my utmost to bring all of us together and say, this is a collective enterprise. We're all engaged in this together. We're all we're going to stand or fall on each other's success. It's the old adage, you know, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. The more you can create that sense of oneness in terms of the whole, the farther you'll go. So, you know, I hope that, you know, now the election season is over and we're all down to the hard work of actually governing and making something work, that people put the we versus them aside and get to what the real deal is, which is we're all in this together. How do we make it work?
When you're running a massive company like Time Warner or Citigroup, obviously you're looking at it from a global perspective, the larger vision for what a company is trying to accomplish. And it seems like, you know, particularly in city and state government, that it usually that oftentimes elected officials get bogged down with minutia, or they're enacting policy on a very piecemeal basis. And how is it that you can keep sight of the larger goals while at the same time dealing with the day-to-day minutia?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I would say almost, I would not make the distinction you made between private and public, because the problem with running a big enterprise, or the problem with being in government, is that you get drawn to the front. You get drawn to the firefight, because that's where people are, you know, living and dying, so to speak, and you don't have enough of an opportunity to step back and look at the bigger picture. And so I think the only way to combat that, or the best way, there is no only way, is to up front, before, and this is why this is a good exercise you're going through, before you get into the trenches and before the firefights start, to have an agenda, to have a sort of set of things that this is what I hope to accomplish in my time at this post. These are the big things, and you almost tack them up on the wall, and then you make reference to it as you go through the day-to-day, because you've thought through up front kind of what's the big picture? What is it that I hope to be able to say at the end of this that I accomplished or moved the ball forward? So, for example, an incoming city council might have, even though it isn't so directly the city council's role anymore, but might have a business agenda, an education agenda, a city civility agenda, that there are a few principles articulated under, and then you just refer